4 more years. The president says he's got new political capital and he's determined to spend it. Mr. Bush lays out the priorities for a second term. Critical condition, conflicting reports about Yasser Arafat's health, and new questions about the future of the Middle East. Cancer diagnosis. John Edwards' wife Elizabeth learns she has breast cancer on the same day the Democratic team concedes the presidential election. And going out of business, why some tiny towns with a big problem are all too happy to fade away.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. President Bush entered office 4 years ago with a deficit in the popular vote and a contested electoral victory. Today, he enters a second term with both a substantial popular and electoral vote victory, what he calls political capital, and he intends to spend it. We begin with the president's plans tonight. From NBC's David Gregory at the White House. David?
Tom, the president celebrated his victory by calling a press conference this morning to talk about his second term, and he immediately made clear that he is going to test the goodwill of Democrats whose support he says he wants.
From the very start today, the president's good mood was obvious.
Yesterday, I pledged to reach out to the whole nation, and today I'm proving that I'm willing to reach out to everybody by including the White House press corps.
The day after securing re-election, Mr. Bush sounded eager to get started on his second-term agenda. But despite promises to heal the political divisions in the country, the president made clear he expected Democrats to come to him.
I'll reach out to everyone who shares our goals.
Mr. Bush said the election has given him political capital, which he intends to spend on his agenda.
When you win, there is a feeling that the people have spoken and embraced your point of view, and that's what I intend to tell the Congress.
The second-term domestic agenda is expansive, extending education reform by imposing new accountability standards on high schools, making permanent the tax cuts passed during his first term, and a broader effort to revamp the tax code, which the president says is too complicated, confronting the glut of what Mr. Bush calls junk personal injury lawsuits, and Social Security reform, which would let younger workers create private savings accounts. Creating such accounts would be very costly, up to $2 trillion, some experts say, but the president insisted it is worth it to preserve the increasingly strained program.
And there are going to be costs, but the cost of doing nothing is insignificant, is much greater than the cost of reforming the system today.
On Iraq, with elections slated for next January, the president refused to divulge how much more money he'll request from Congress to help secure the country. As for repairing strained alliances as a result of the war, Mr. Bush made clear he was not about to shy away from the centerpiece of his foreign policy.
I just strongly disagree with those who do not see the wisdom of trying to promote free societies around the world.
Mr. Bush was also asked today about the role of faith in this election, specifically that those voters who attend church regularly favored him by wide margins.
My answer to people is I will be your president regardless of your faith, and I don't expect you to agree with me necessarily on religion.
And the president today was unusually reflective as he spoke about what it was like sharing his re-election with his father, who failed in his bid for a second term. By the time Kerry conceded yesterday, the elder Bush had left the White House.
I never got to see him face to face, to watch his, I guess, pride in his tired eyes as his son got a second term.
The president clearly felt like talking today, but not about everything. He said he hasn't even started to think about changes in his cabinet during a second term, but he will this weekend while at Camp David. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC David Gregory. In the meantime, however, there's a lot of speculation about that. We'll have more on the second term and what the new Bush cabinet may look like with Tim Russert in a few moments on NBC News In Depth tonight. The president and his foreign policy team also have a major development in the Middle East on their agenda tonight, what appears to be the final days, if not the final hours, for Yasser Arafat, the longtime powerful leader of the Palestinian fight with Israel. NBC's Keith Miller is at the Paris hospital where Arafat is being treated.
Reports of Yasser Arafat's death were exaggerated, as it turned out, but still widespread today. Announced as a bulletin on Israeli TV. Reported by the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. Finally, a French military spokesman, urged on by Arafat's wife, set the record straight. In French, he's not dead. But Arafat is desperately ill. French doctors have still not made public what is wrong with Arafat. Overnight, he was moved into intensive care. He slipped into a coma, according to medical sources, who describe his condition as grave. So sensitive is the Palestinian leadership to negative health reports that today they seemed in denial.
Nothing, no coma, no coma, no coma. He is in a treatment. He is in a treatment.
Yasser Arafat is a symbol. He is representative of years, decades of struggle on the part of the Palestinians. And it's not an easy thing to say goodbye to this symbolic figure.
Already there is speculation about who will replace Arafat as Palestinian president. The current prime minister, Ahmed Kureis, is considered a skilled politician but lacks charisma. The number 2 in the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, has experience but doesn't have popular support. Mohammed Dahlan, the former interior minister, is a popular strongman. He's seen as one of the leaders of the new generation of Palestinians who can do business with Israel.
The Palestinians need is a leader who is going to stamp his authority on them, to bring under control his rivals, for example, Hamas.
Tonight, Palestinians set up a candlelight vigil outside the hospital gates. Inside, Arafat is reportedly unconscious. And according to medical sources, there is little they can do to save his life. Keith Miller, NBC News, Paris.
In this country, of course, Arafat's deteriorating condition raises some old questions with a new sense of urgency. What should America's Middle East policy be after Arafat? Most pressing, if Arafat dies, will that help or hurt the Middle East peace process? Here's NBC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent, Andrea Mitchell.
The president has long blamed Yasser Arafat for not controlling the violence against Israel and cut off all contact with him after this meeting 2 years ago, sidelining diplomatic efforts by Secretary of State Colin Powell. Aides say Mr. Bush viewed Arafat as the chief obstacle to peace.
I want people to elect new leaders, leaders not compromised by terror.
But today, when a reporter mistakenly thought Arafat had already died, the president had this to say.
My first reaction is, God bless his soul.
With the president having no confidence in Arafat, critics say Mr. Bush has been in lockstep with Israel's Prime Minister Sharon, siding with him against the Palestinians at every turn.
They said Arafat was an obstacle. Now you have real change.
And an unexpected development in the campaign trail. Today, the surprise announcement that Elizabeth Edwards, wife of the Democratic vice presidential nominee John Edwards, has been diagnosed with breast cancer. That story tonight from NBC's Kelly O'Donnell.
Within just an hour of John Edwards' acknowledgement of defeat.
There will always be heartache and struggle. You can't make it go away.
The public and even many with the campaign did not know the Edwardses were faced with another far more personal setback.
My rock, my love, and your next vice president, John Edwards.
55-year-old Elizabeth Edwards learned she has breast cancer, a common form of the disease called invasive duct that doctors say affects 135,000 women each year.
Most women do extremely well with the treatment for breast cancer, and our results of treatment are getting better, and mortality rates are dropping.
The Edwardses left yesterday's concession to head right to an appointment with a cancer specialist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, where Elizabeth had a needle biopsy. Today, at home in Washington, Senator Edwards released a statement saying, "Elizabeth is as strong a person as I've ever known. Together, our family will beat this." Aides to Senator Edwards say Elizabeth discovered a lump in her right breast last week while on the campaign trail. She saw her own doctor Friday when the couple went home to North Carolina to vote. Aides say the family's now awaiting the results of more tests to determine a course of treatment. Married 27 years, together they have 4 children. The Edwardses lost their oldest son in a car accident 8 years ago. Aides say Elizabeth delayed her follow-up appointment until after the election so she would not miss out on the campaign. Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News, Boston.
It's NBC News in depth tonight. More on the president's new term and new cabinet. NBC's Tim Russert joins me to talk about who will stay, who will go, what will be the role of the Republican Congress. Later, the drastic steps some small towns are taking to deal with high taxes. They're simply going out of business. NBC News in depth tonight. More on the future of the new Bush administration, which will certainly include some new faces among the senior staff in the cabinet. NBC's Washington bureau chief and moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert, joins me now with more on who's in, who's out. Now, the president's saying he hasn't thought about that. He's going off to Camp David, but already the nation's capital is rife with speculation, Tim.
It sure is, Tom. Large discussions that Secretary of State Colin Powell will want to leave, replaced by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice or former Missouri Senator John Danforth, just two of the names mentioned. The Attorney General John Ashcroft, a favorite with the evangelical Christians, largely credited with helping to re-elect the president, probably will leave. But evangelicals will be watching that position very closely. They want to have someone who is supportive of their issues. Homeland Security Director Tom Ridge, scheduled to leave probably this summer. Also, Tom, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson. It's also expected the president will reach out to the Democrats, Tom. Senator John Breaux, the retiring senator from Louisiana, is one prominently mentioned.
And Tim, what about the role of the new Republican Congress? Their power has been consolidated, and it's moved, I think it's fair to say, even more to the right on the political spectrum.
Well, they're feeling their oats, Tom. They have 55 senators, but they realize that you need 60 senators or 5 Democrats to join with them to break any filibuster of a potential appointment or legislation. One other interesting note, Arlen Specter, the Republican from Pennsylvania, is slated to become chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He is very much pro-abortion rights and would be involved very deeply in the selection of any Supreme Court nominee. And one last thing, Tom, the Democrats, particularly Democrats who live in the red states or Republican states, now have a new term. We have to be careful that we're not dashled, referring to what happened to Democratic leader Tom Daschle of South Dakota, who the White House really did turn up all their political power to defeat on Tuesday.
Tim, very quickly, one name we've not mentioned, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. He's determined to transform the military. Does he think his job is completed?
Not yet, Tom, and he certainly wants to stay through the Iraqi election scheduled in January. It's expected that if Secretary Rumsfeld wants to stay, he'll stay at least for perhaps another half year or full year. He's not being pushed. This is his second term, if you will, as Secretary of Defense, having served President Ford and now President Bush.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Tim Russert tonight. On Wall Street today, a sharp uptick for stocks as President Bush outlined his agenda for a second term. The Dow was up almost 78 points. NASDAQ was up almost 20 points at the end of the day. Up next, images of what happens when the fireworks go off inside a fireworks factory. Spectacular but highly dangerous. More now on the president's plans for a second term, specifically his plans for Iraq. As NBC David Gregory reported earlier, Mr. Bush has no intention of changing course there. What does that mean? NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski has more on all that tonight.
Let's go. Let's go.
Health news tonight. More bad news from Merck, the makers of the arthritis drug Vioxx. A new study from Swiss researchers finds there is scientific evidence going back 4 years that Vioxx can cause heart attacks and that Merck and the federal government should have taken the drug off the market a long time ago. There's also new research tonight that may hold promise for helping smokers quit. Researchers pinpointed a single molecule in mice that's a key to nicotine addiction. They think their findings could lead to new medications to help people quit smoking. Close to 500,000 Americans die from smoking-related causes every year. Then there's America's obesity epidemic, having new ramifications all the time. Now, apparently, it is hurting the airline industry. Listen to this. A report from the Centers for Disease Control says that in the year 2000, airlines had to spend an extra $275 million on fuel just to carry the extra weight of passengers. In Denmark, a huge stash of fireworks went up at the wrong place and the wrong time, setting off at least one explosion as powerful as a small earthquake. One firefighter was killed and close to 24 homes were destroyed when a fire erupted in 2 containers at a fireworks factory. It then spread quickly to other supplies inside the factory. Police say the facility may have been stockpiling more fireworks than legally allowed. I'll be right back.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, brought to you in part by Aflac. Ask about it at work.
Tomorrow. Some of America's best-known businesses have gone out of business or declared bankruptcy to save what they had left. But whole towns, can they, in effect, disappear themselves to relieve their financial obligations? What better place to test that theory than Maine, the home of small-town America? Here's NBC's Roger O'Neill. That's Nightly News for this Thursday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Next.
For Arafat's medical condition, a spokesman describes it as a critical point now between life and death. Later, more than 3 decades of bringing the story home. NBC's Robert Hager files his last report for NBC Nightly News on our business then and now.
Tomorrow, high stakes and much uncertainty. What's the future for peace in the Middle East? Brian Williams reports live from the region. NBC Nightly News tomorrow.
The Nightly Journal, brought to you by Walmart. Always low prices. Always.
Our Nightly Journal tonight. From time to time, one of those journalism study groups compiles a list of the network correspondents